Natalie Kovarik claims that she got to where she is now by accident. However, this fourth generation cattle rancher who transitioned from a career as a pharmacist has made some very intentional choices that built a whole new career. Hi, I'm Dave Price, and this is the American Farmland Owner Podcast. Natalie grew up on a Montana ranch. She left to become a pharmacist, but then she met a guy and fell in love, and they moved to small town Nebraska for life on a cattle ranch. Now, with the help of a woman known as the New Mexico Milkmaid, she is co-hosting a podcast. It brings a mix of love for small town living, sustainable food production, and pop culture. She's working on several things these days, and that's where we begin our conversation. Will you first just kind of talk about your life? I was looking through your website, and it's complicated. You're doing a lot doing a lot of stuff. Why did you choose this life?
Yeah, I wear a lot of hats, but a lot of people out there do.
Sure.
I feel like this life chose me. So I grew up in agriculture. I grew up on a cattle ranch in Southwest Montana. Very, very beautiful part of the state. Really enjoyed growing up on a ranch, was involved in my family ranch, but my parents definitely gave me and my sisters, I'm the youngest of four girls, which is interesting household to grow up. Anyone tuning in knows what I'm talking about. But they gave us the gift of choice. And so I ended up choosing a degree outside of agriculture. And I knew that, ranching and farming and the lifestyle would stay a part of my life, but I never envisioned it to be my life, as an adult. I chose pharmacy. And so I was practicing as a full-time pharmacist, living near our family ranch, spending time there. But like I said, I was very content in the healthcare world. And so I didn't think I would live on a ranch. I didn't think I'd marry a rancher. I didn't think I'd be here talking with you about agriculture, let alone sharing about it online, to millions. And so I say that it kind of chose me. I met my husband and he kind of brought me back full circle to agriculture. And, through different choices, I ended up, doing some things online.
And you ended up in Nebraska.
Yeah, so he was a Nebraska rancher. He was up at our family bull sale looking for cattle. And so the running joke is that he came for a bull and left with a wife, which is a very, very romantic story. Every girl dreams of being
Yeah, that's like
there.
a Hallmark one.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, when you are tied to agriculture, I kind of knew going into dating him that if things were going to get serious, it probably involved me relocating. You don't just typically sell your ranch, sell your animals, and uproot what you were doing. So I kind of knew that I was going to have a big change coming in my life if I chose, that route with my now current husband. So obviously I did.
Exactly. Hey, will you talk a little bit about you're kind of sharing your life with the world, both podcast, video, you do the speaking circuit, all that kind of stuff. And why choose to do that? Because some people are, as you know, in ag are super private about what they do. They want to just make their farm or ranch work. They they're dependent on themselves. They work their butts off and they hope to make enough of a living and then one day pass it on to their kids or grandkids or at least somebody in the family, right? You're kind of opening up many things. Why do
Mhm.
it? Why do that?
So again, it was very accidental. When I married my husband, he ranches outside of a town about 2,000. So we're fairly remote. I am, for context, about an hour and a half from like a Target or a Walmart. And so that meant that I didn't have a pharmacy job to take, when I relocated, unless I wanted to make a very extended commute a part of our family daily routine. And that was something my husband and I did not want. So what I ended up doing, for whatever odd reason, was starting a direct to consumer beef business. And I did that with a childhood friend who was actually back in Montana, who was on a ranch. And so we knew that in order to start getting strangers to sell beef from us, to get food online, you really had to build a community and you really had to establish trust and you had to do marketing. And so we ended up using social media as kind of the core foundation for that business. And so that was really my introduction to it. And I went into that business thinking I was only going to use social media for product, right? I just wanted to use it as an effective marketing tool to sell the product of our beef. And somewhere along the way, I really, one, fell in love with the creative process that you have when it comes to social media. For some people, at least, I think I've always kind of been a creative at heart, but having, a degree in pharmacy, I didn't get to express that really. And so it just kind of felt like an exciting outlet. But two, I also really saw the power of social media as a marketing tool. Like when you get in the back end and you start seeing how many people you're reaching them for free, and you are completely in control of that messaging. It just felt like there was a lot of things I could do beyond using social media to sell meat. So my mind really started turning, like the wheels were just clicking of like how I could use it to talk about agriculture and how I could use it for our family and, a couple different things. And so that is how I ended up kind of stumbling into sharing our family life online. The pharmacist to social media entrepreneur was through a direct to consumer beef business.
I don't know if this is a stretch or not, but I'm thinking of the pharmacists that our family has used over the years. And in particular, I'm thinking about it anytime I have to go in there and pick up a prescription for the kids, when it's some new thing, right? And it has I appreciate that you know all this stuff, but when the word is like this long and you can't
Yeah.
even say it out loud and you're like, oh my gosh. Like for me, I'm like, okay. But if it's for the kids, it's like you want to be extra sure. And does it have a side effect? Do you take it on a full stomach, an empty stomach, whatever the heck it is? But the good ones have some kind of uh, interpersonal communication skills, right? Where you can get that across. So maybe this isn't a huge stretch.
Yeah, it's funny. I've never thought of it that way. I have thought before that kind of my background in social media with things being kind of black and white in the sense of if you ask me a question as a pharmacist about a medication you take, I can't kind of say, oh, well, I don't know. I think it's okay. I think it'll be safe. I have to be
Yeah.
very sure in my messaging and a lot of the research too. And when I first started sharing online and kind of made that pivot to sharing about my family and kind of advocating for the industry as a whole, I did do a lot of heavy agriculture advocating. And I do think my background in pharmacy actually, as you kind of mentioned, oddly enough, prepared me for a little bit of how to read through some of the studies and like you said articulate that and really pick a stance and then communicate that and kind of like stand by it. And so yeah, you wouldn't think that it would prepare you, for social media, but I do think, all I when people talk about the different choices they made in their life, they usually say they picked up something that helped them to put them where they are. So
For those not connected to ag, I'm thinking that when they have heard you say you're an hour and a half from Target or Walmart, they're thinking, whoa,
yeah.
how's that work?
Yeah, it's a little different. So I grew up in a small town in Montana, so it wasn't too much of a culture shock for
Hmm.
me. I think I've always kind of obviously been accustomed to it. I actually kind of prefer it. I think every small town kid has angsty dreams of being a teenager and going out and experiencing life, and they're going to move to, the quote unquote big city, and
Hmm.
the small town life isn't for them. But I think when you grow up, get past some of that and enter adulthood, you start weighing things that are important to you and your values and how you want to spend your time. And the rural life really is conducive to me and how I want to spend my time and how I want to raise my family. And so yeah, it's very frustrating some days. I miss a Costco. I miss my, when I was living in Montana, I was living in a bigger city, like about half an hour from our family ranch. And so I did have all of those amenities at my fingertips. But so I miss that. I miss a good, weekend dinner out. We basically have one fast food joint in our small little town. And then other than that, you are driving for if you want to have a date night or anything of the sort. And so I miss some of that. But I think overall, the, kind of rural country lifestyle is definitely more conducive to, the way I want to personally live, but also the way I want to raise my children.
So, what do you think about that lifestyle, kind of for our country? If we start looking at the stats, we have fewer farms, bigger farms, but then in some places, like I'm talking to you from Iowa, Iowa is a little different in the sense that we are expanding the number of farms, and it's a lot of these people are getting into it almost as like a side hustle, even though that's really not what it is, but they almost have to work full time off the farm to make it work on the farm, especially if they had to go seek financing on their own. And I know you go out and speak to people across the country and that. Like, what are those conversations like looking at the future?
Yeah, I think we're in a very interesting time right now. So, 2020, obviously, I think changed a lot of people's perspectives on how they're spending their time, how they want to spend their time. And then obviously, it changed their correlation and the way they think of food, right? So, I feel like that was a very wide opening experience for people to kind of maybe ask questions and want to have like that connection back to where their food comes from and, farming and ranching in general. I have a podcast, Discover Ag, and we actually talk about, trending news topics every single week. We kind of meld agriculture and pop culture. So we're hitting a lot of kind of current, little bit more mainstream popish topics. And one thing we've talked about extensively on the podcast, not by choice, it's just always in the news. You can't escape it, is the MAHA movement, right? So I remember last year when President-elect at the time, Kennedy, had said, or he was giving his resignation speech, no longer running. And I remember in the middle of that speech, he devoted 20 or 30 minutes of it talking about food. And there were even parts of farming in there. And I remember thinking, gosh, this is really something that you have someone with this large of a platform choosing to talk and focus on food and farming. And I thought that something like there's something here. Like we've never had focus on our lifestyle in this manner before. And that's just carried forward, right? I mean, you're just continuing to see if you're familiar with the MAHA Make America Healthy Again movement, whether you're for it or against it, or kind of both. I kind of fall under that. Some things I think are great, some things I'm very concerned about. You can't escape it. It is the movement right now for people to have interest in kind of food and farming and ranching and country, as you said, and homesteading and kind of
Hmm.
dabbling in that lifestyle. And so it is an interesting juxtaposition, as you said, that we have this interest and focus in this lifestyle and this way we live. But if you look at the data and the numbers, you are seeing consolidation. You are seeing some of the smaller farms going out of business and the larger ones getting larger. And so I think it's a really interesting time. I don't quite know what it actually means looking forward.
Hmm.
Consolidation is like a hard beast, I think, to stop. Once it
Yeah.
gets rolling, it's like, how do you stop it? But I do think we have piqued people, not just, the 2% to look into this and fight this and want to a certain version of food and farming and ranching to exist, but almost, the population right now is very interested. And so it'll be, I think it'll be a wild 2025, 2026. Like, I think we have some big years coming up ahead that could drastically change the future of, agriculture and what that looks like.
For the last couple of decades, I worked in television and interviewed a lot of politicians in that, and like you mentioned, uh, RFK Jr. He came to Iowa and campaigned when he was briefly running for president. And what you don't hear a lot of times, though, is much focus on smaller communities and what it's going to take, not just for them to like survive and appreciate that most people who live in smaller communities don't want it to be New York City one day, right? Like that's why they live there. They don't want the traffic and all that stuff that comes with it. But there has to be some kind of commitment to it to give you, you can clearly survive without a Costco, right? And you can, if you don't have a super Target, your family's not going to go hungry or what have you. But there are some things you got to have school, you have to have some kind of educational system, whatever it is, technology. You have to have healthcare of some sort. So, what's important to you as you look at kind of your community and really smaller, kind of rural town USA?
Yeah, I recently attended a Women in Ag conference here in Nebraska last month, and there was a speaker there, and she is from a small town in Iowa, actually, kind of right on the border of Iowa and Nebraska. And she's doing some really cool initiatives in her small town, just different events she's hosting and different things. And so she kind of came, they had her as a breakout session to kind of talk about how you can get these things going up in your small towns. And she said something that I think really stuck with me and that I had never thought about before. And she said, if you want cool things to happen in your small town, you have to do cool things.
Hmm.
And I thought, gosh, that's so true. Because as you mentioned, a lot of people who choose to live, more rural prefer it that way. Like when I go even into my, hour and a half town, which is 25,000, 30,000, maybe, I'm over the traffic, which is not traffic, right? But I'm like, I am going to go and I'm going to run 4 hours of errands. And by the time I ran four, I'm like, I'm done. I'm
I'm
out. I'm
down.
headed back
Yeah.
out to the country. I will come back and do it another day. Like my battery is just drained. And so
Yeah.
we obviously prefer this lifestyle. And yeah, I do think you need, government support, you need infrastructure, you need all these different things. But I think the way she framed it made me really focus on the people. And the people in there also need to, not that we don't step up, but I just thought it was such an interesting way that I feel like, again, thinking of my town and what's important here, I feel blessed that we do have a really great young community. We're actually, I would say, a fairly small town full of younger people, maybe than I would guess across on an average across the nation. We have a very vital youth or kind of robust youth. And so I think that's what I think a lot about now is like, how can I myself get something started? How can I maybe invite someone I know is excels at a skill? How can I
Hmm.
invite them or encourage them to launch or do or be involved? And so maybe it's like a little bit more proactive approach from a personal standpoint to like keep your community going. I think I've just never, maybe I've never felt it was like my responsibility. And now I kind of understand like it is my responsibility a little bit if I want to choose here to either A, do it myself or encourage those around me. Like we can do this. We can have a small, cool community.
So how do you and your husband communicate that message to your kids?
Yeah, that's so interesting. I am so not only having my own podcast, I'm actually a podcast kind of junkie myself. Like I just consume them a lot. It's Lent right now, and I've been thinking I should really give up podcasting as my Lenten activity because it would be a good,
Free up.
a good open space for God to enter back in my life if I cut out, the amount of hours I have something
How
else
about
chirping.
you can find faith-based though podcasts too, so
Yeah,
maybe there's a way to meet in the middle.
way around it. But I would say, oddly enough, maybe it's a message that I've been supposed to be hearing too. But I swear, maybe the four out of the last five podcasts I've listened to have been on entrepreneurship families.
Mm.
And the interesting thing they always talked about that was a common thread between all of them is that they brought their kids along for everything and involved them. And so my husband and I were talking about that the other day at the ranch because I do think there's a difference between making your kids go out and work on the ranch and involving them in the ranch operation, like taking them to sale barns or sitting down and planning out, different budgets or like conversations my husband and I are having. How can we involve our kids in the bigger picture of running a business and entrepreneurship and bring them along for that journey rather than just like, you have chores, go work. And so I think that's something that, going back to the question of like, how do you instill that in your children? I think it's bringing them along. It's communicating like, I'm leaving tonight because I'm on the school board. So I'm going, mom is going to do this to help our school run. Or like, I think it's like involving them in the bigger picture of things. And so they understand kind of how important people are in small communities to making them run.
What is your does your the ranch operation, does it have a thing? Does it have a theme you try to uphold?
Oh, like an ethos or a mission? No, but we should start one. That's a really good idea. My husband's gonna be like, great, another thing we need to
Yeah,
do.
yeah, but you have a pretty, you have a well-designed website for you personally, and then you can branch off that and look at the cattle operation too.
Yeah. No, I mean, I've always been a believer, and this is something I'm bringing over to ranch, but I think marketing is really, really powerful in today's age. And so, yeah, you could say, I actually just had our website redone this past year, and I'm really proud of it. I would say it's kind of a more up and cutting edge version of a ranch website. Most
For
people don't
sure.
even have ranch websites. And so, yeah, I don't know. I guess I believed strongly in the visual marketing. I believe strongly in social media marketing. We do that for our operation, which not a ton of people do. We're also first generation. So I'm obviously fourth from Montana, but we're not on my Montana ranch. And my husband, he grew up exposed through it and is technically fifth generation through a grandparents' production agriculture ranch, but he grew up in town. He wasn't raised on a ranch. So everything we have, we're starting fresh and new, and which is, kind of nice from the marketing standpoint and all those different things. We can kind of brand ourselves how we want. But no, we don't have, generations of an ethos or a mission to kind of fall back on because it's really us that's like starting it and doing it.
So when you're out speaking, what do people want to know?
Oh, that's so interesting. I have two keynotes that I give, and so I guess I funnel, it would be kind of, funneled through that. But one of them I give on the culture of agriculture. And so it kind of aligns with what we talk about on my podcast, like what's going on around us and how does that affect the agriculture industry moving forward. And so I talk a lot about current events. It's kind of pretty much a keynote that changes all the time because I have to update
Sure.
it every
Sure.
single time I give it. It's a little exhausting. And so I think people are fascinated in that, obviously, of, what are these movements outside of us and how is that affecting agriculture, A, now, and like, what does that mean for us? Either A, how can we leverage it as an industry and use it to our benefit? Or two, what is something of concern that we need to maybe like, understand and be, more conscientious of from kind of maybe a negative aspect. And then my other keynote I give actually is a little bit more motivational. I speak on the importance of risk taking and bravery in building your kind of, I guess, your, dreams or your business. I talk a lot about leaving pharmacy and taking the risk to start my social entrepreneur journey. And then also a lot of the risks we have taken to build our first generation ranch. And I kind of root that on my belief that bravery is a very important characteristic to have as an entrepreneur. And I think a lot of people take interest in our journey and story as a first generation operation because it's not easy thing to do to break into production agriculture at this standpoint. And so I think a lot of people enjoy hearing that and have questions about how my husband and I do that and like what that looks like for us.
Bravery also often means overcoming fears. So, were there fears as you left one career and left one state to go to another for this new life?
I think for any sane, rational person, yes, there would have been a lot of them, but I think I've just been hardwired my entire life to maybe not operate or recognize fear in the way that some people do. I build my ship at sea a lot. That's like one of my favorite sayings kind of about my life is I just kind of figure it out as I go. I'm not too worried about making sure I have an absolute plan. I personally believe a lot in gut intuition, and so I feel like I've done a really good job of throughout my life listening to my instincts and following them. And I kind of have enough confidence in myself to know that if I'm feeling very strongly about a decision, that I'm not personally going to lead myself astray. So a lot of those big decisions and life risks for me that again other people maybe would have dwelled in more of like the fear of the outcome of what if it goes wrong,
Hmm.
what will people think of me, all of that. I've kind of just always trusted that this is something I want to do and I have the confidence to do it, and so I think it's all going to work out. And so it's a definitely a positive trait to have, but you can ask my husband that as living with someone and working with someone, it can also be a negative because I'm always
Sure.
coming up with ideas that I think again, sane people would say that's maybe a little bit too much of a risk. And so I think it's a little bit daunting on my husband to kind of weed through those and maybe, rein me in a little bit.
Hopefully this doesn't get too personal, but I've met so many people through the podcast, married couples, where it's almost a necessity for at least one person to work off-site, off farm, off ranch, whatever to make it. Does do you all make it as a family because of your, now you keep making the comment about being sane or not sane, but your willingness to try all this other stuff? Is this icing on the cake, or is this a necessity to build this life? Because it's hard to start your own thing.
Yep,
You,
absolutely. So I actually talk about this in my keynote because my husband did not want me to quit pharmacy when
mm,
when I had that urge, that instinct
hmm.
to step away from it. He, as you mentioned, allude to, I only worked part-time as a pharmacist. So I
Okay.
wasn't bringing in like a very, a large full-time income, but it was
Uh-huh.
definitely something. And it was steady and it was not connected to agriculture, which is definitely a safety net. I would say emotionally for a lot of farm and ranch families is just knowing that the ups and downs of the market are not going to be affected. We have this X amount that will be coming in. It's, I think mentally it really makes a difference. Obviously, it does financially, but I think there's something there emotionally for
Sure.
people. So, my husband, when I had that inkling, I came to him and said, I kind of think I should step away with pharmacy. I just don't think I can kind of manage everything we're doing and do any of it well. I equated it to like I was getting C's in everything I was doing, and I felt like if I kind of weeded things out, I could earn some A's, right? I would just
Hmm.
have more time and focus and energy instead of, you know, lateral growth. It would be or vertical and horizontal, right?
Yeah.
And so he was a little unsure, and he said, you know what, why don't we just see it was just kind of like fall time. And he was like, why don't we just see where we're at the end of the year financially and see how you're feeling? Again, knowing that I kind of get excited about different opportunities and things. He was like, we'll just kind of revisit this in a couple months. If you still feel that way and, numbers are looking good for our family, you can talk to your boss, see what that looks like. And maybe next spring, we could talk about
Hmm.
stepping away. And that actually felt really great to me. I was like, great, light at the end of the tunnel. I can manage what I'm doing. But there was something exciting to me that like next year I could maybe start building some of these things I wanted to build online. But I ended up quitting 2 weeks later. I had to call my husband and say, I know we were planning next spring, but I quit today. He took it really, really well.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, but I again, no, I knew I did. We do use my speaking, the podcast, everything I do on social media. It replaces my that or salary I was earning. So it is
Sure.
not icing on the cake. It is required for my family. And I think that's one reason why I've actually been successful at all of this is because I've always approached it with a business mindset. So a lot of people will get on, online to share and if maybe they don't have the intent or the focus or they don't need the money. And so, the time or the desire or the
Hmm.
effort kind of gets put back burner, right? Behind everything else. But for me, it was like, I am going to step away from pharmacy and I'm going to run an online business. And these are the ways I'm going to monetize it. And this is the way I'm going to make it work from our family. And so it has definitely made a difference and an impact. My husband and I talk a lot about that. It's in my keynote as well about how, again, taking that risk actually afforded us different opportunities and brought us different things that if I had just remained a pharmacist, I don't think we would even be doing or had done.
So where do you want to take it?
So my podcast is our baby. I have kind of stepped away a little bit from sharing on more like my personal channels and like that personal brand, quote unquote influencing, a lot of people will call
Hmm.
it. I really love the podcasting space. I have a host that does it with me and she's a dairy farmer in New Mexico. And when we launched it together, we were kind of thinking, well, we'll do seasons, we'll just see how it goes
Yeah.
and podcast here and there. And since we started, we've missed maybe three weeks. I mean, it is absolutely, we both fell in love with it. I think it is such a beautiful gift, the podcasting space in today's society when every other social media platform is telling you get shorter and shorter and shorter and condense more and more and more. We have a space where we can have long form conversations and really form relationships. And I think a lot of the things that we want to talk about that are important to us in agriculture and food and these important conversations do need a heftier length than a clickbait headline or a 9-second reel. And so it just fits really, really well with what we want to do. So a lot of my future of where I want to take our things is continuing to grow and build our podcast community. And then I am applying. I've never really done it before. We've kind of dabbled in it, but I'm applying again a lot of the things I've learned with social media and a lot of my different skills with social media to marketing for our ranch specifically, instead of again kind of like our family and myself personally.
And what is that like? Because Tara's in another state, as you mentioned. So
Yeah.
how does that dynamic work? Because
Yeah,
that adds to the uniqueness of the podcast.
it does. Yeah, we always say we have built, a six-figure business through voice notes on texting, and that is not a normal thing to do. But we have clicked. I think I've learned a lot about business partners and things that are important in working with someone and building something with someone. And fortunately, a lot of the way Tara and I work together with our personalities is a good fit. And so there are days I wish we could go in and just work next to each other, and it would probably take half the time it does as sending
Sure.
notes or emails and all the different things we have to do back and forth. But as you said, I do think it adds kind of depth and texture and layer to our podcast of the different perspectives we have. She's in the dairy industry, she's in the South. I'm in Central in Nebraska, I'm in the beef industry. And so it's fun. It's fun. I made a new best friend miles away. But I also think that is this generation. How many people have you now met their business partner online or met their spouse online? And so I think it's just the way of our generation too.
Hey, can you back up a little bit about you talked about the Maha. I'm fascinated because I'm personally fascinated by where this is going to go. RFK Jr. is a guy that, some people think he has crazy conspiracy theories about stuff. Some people think that he will be kind of a fresh set of eyes, fresh voice, looking into stuff, and we clearly have challenges of when it comes to our health, when it comes to autism, all kinds of stuff that some things we can't really explain why things are happening
Hmm.
that are happening. And because you explore the world of food in this new life you've put together, how do you try to get to this?
Yeah. He is an interesting character. I think that he was the right man at the right time to get this ball rolling down the hill to create the snowball effect and the momentum that was needed. As you said, I mean, it's pretty hard to deny that we're a nation that doesn't have some problems that need fixed with our food system and the health system. It is hard because Maha, you can kind of break into two umbrellas. There are people that are really affected and kind of come at it and are more interested on the healthcare side of it. So those are the vaccine people is like a huge conversation
Hmm.
for them, right? There's different things on that side, pharmaceutical industry that I feel like is very, very different than when you get over to like kind of the food health, not health, but like the food farming agriculture side of Maha. And so sometimes that gets intermingled with people, and you can use Maha to be talking about completely different things. So we don't talk much about the healthcare pharmaceutical side of the Maha movement. We really focus more on obviously the food farming side of it. And for that, I do think he was the right person to kind of come in at the right time to say, like, okay, these are the concerns of the nation. These are the concerns of mostly, I would say, a lot of parents, right? Like this comes down to like the children future of of how we want the food industry to be for them. So I think he was a good voice for that. And I think someone did need to come in and step up and say, like, hey, we have a problem and we need to start focusing on this and talking about this and fixing this. As far as like getting into like making agriculture policies and making food policies, I'm not necessarily sure that he is the right person for that. I have some concerns of different things he would maybe implement or the way he looks at different things. And so for me, it feels like segmenting two things out. It's like there was someone that was needed to kickstart this, but we maybe need someone else or multiple people, honestly, to come in and get to the nitty gritty details of like what the change actually looks like and how we actually make that change happen.
But but to me personally, I think that's one thing that people like you can help lead though, right? Because you're going to have you and Tara can have a specific and extended conversation and perspectives about some of this stuff. And even if we have all of this, you're just taking one little thing to kind of chunk your way through. And we, as a community, need to talk about more stuff than we do.
Yeah, absolutely. So that is the point and the mission of the podcast is to almost debrief you every single week on like what is happening and around you. So instead of just talking about the Maha movement at the greater, panning way out at the macro level, we really get into on the micro level and we say, hey, this week, like last week, we covered Brooke Rollins, her plan to decrease egg prices and get that back on track. And so that was
Hmm.
one of the articles we talked about. We talked about an opening article was actually a social media reel that was going viral, talking about a food influencer was talking about food she would never buy in the grocery store. So we ended up kind of talking about food waste, and we talked a little bit about the Dirty Dozen, organic. And so, yeah, we really get in there on the micro level of like, okay, this is the loudest thing going on in the media right now, whether that's traditional, like through a magazine, New York Times ran an
Hmm.
article, or social media, like this reel is popping off, this TikTok is popping off. And then we talk about that and we pick 5 articles that week to talk about. So it keeps you up. Like our podcast is meant to keep you up to date what's going on in the food world. But again, we meld it with pop culture so that you feel like you're really getting, I don't know, kind of the latest, trendiest news.
Let's put a bow on this. I always like to have the guest, kind of step back and maybe leave us with something deeper about kind of why you love what you love. You've mentioned a couple of things. You had opportunities elsewhere, and you and your husband kind of built this life where it is for a reason. Can you expand on that to close out? Like, what is it about that is so appealing to you?
Yeah, so I have to give credit to my husband. He's one of those people that you knew when they were little that they just knew what they were going to do and they were
Mm.
always going to do that. And for him, it was cows and ranching. He's always wanted to do that. He came out of the womb, wrote that on his resume. That's what he wanted to do. So the passion and the love he has for the way we live is almost impossible to be around him and not feel it for yourself. And that's not to say that he is choosing that lifestyle for us, but I think the the way we choose to live is such a shared passion for both of us that it feels very, very special. So a lot of it for me goes back to my children and how I get to raise them, how I'm home with them more. That's one of the reasons we love social media, is that I get to be home with them more. I love that we're raising them in it is an industry that we can bring them along for, going back to, how do you instill entrepreneurship and responsibility and things like that in your children. Our kids are with us a lot. They get to come out and they chore with us as a family, and we get to bring them along, which is very, very special to me. And then I just like that, I am a more content person in a slower paced kind of outdoor lifestyle. And so for me, that is very, very appealing. That obviously that's what ranching is. You're spending your days and your time outside. The other thing that feels very, that's on a personal level. On the podcast level, I'm very, very, it's important to me. My mission over there isn't necessarily to talk about the news, but it is to make agriculture like cool again. That is how I feel about our podcast, is that we are kind of breaking stereotypes. It's really important to us that a male dominated industry gets to have two female voices, two younger, millennial female voices kind of represent it and talk about it, which is not necessarily what most people would think of when you hear, two farmers are sitting down to talk about farming. It is not the conversations that Tara and I have. And so it's very important to me to kind of have that female aspect and kind of represent, women in agriculture. And then, like I said, also kind of break the stereotype of the, farmer in overalls perspective, that's what farmers do. Right. And so it's really fun to kind of make agriculture feel young and hip and cool, and bring these headlines and topics that people are like, oh, I'd never thought of that as being related to food or going back to food. But it is, it's like it's a cultural moment right now. And it's at the heart of it, the seed of it is agriculture. And so that I think is like one of the greatest joys from the podcast too, is that we're able to represent this lifestyle that we love so much in kind of a cool, fun, unique way.
Nice. Natalie, we appreciate getting to know you, and thank you for the conversation.
Yeah, I'm so honored to yap away. It's there's always the joke that it's like the little kid that was in trouble for school talking, like, how's your podcasting going now? So it's always fun to get on and chat with someone else who kind of shares the same passion for bringing really cool conversations for people to tune in about, how great farming and ranching is. So thank you for inviting me and extending the invitation.
For the record, I too got in trouble for talking too much in class, so I think it was destiny. You can find out more about Natalie Kovarik's background and her Discover Ag podcast by checking out our profile piece about her. It's a featured story in the American Farmland Owner newsletter. Our newsletter comes out on Fridays, and it is absolutely free. Go to AmericanFarmlandOwner.com and check it out. Thanks for joining us here, and thanks for caring about the future of our farmland.